Welcome to the Financial Survival Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Carter. Robert Kiyosaki is author of the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. His latest book, coming soon, is called An Unfair Advantage, which, by the way, is exactly what most financially educated people have right now. An unfair advantage, over everybody else, who got a job, saved money, bought a house, invested in a well-diversified portfolio of mutual funds. That plan does not work. And Robert Kiyosaki says those who followed that plan are, very predictably and unfortunately, going through some really rough times right now. And he says it's just only going to get worse. Robert, welcome to the Financial Survival Podcast.
Hey, thank you, and congratulations on your success.
Well, thank you, sir. The news is telling us the recession is over. I say we're probably just beginning a full-blown Great Depression. What do you say?
Well, what I say is that, unfortunately, for a lot of people, the recession is already a depression. In other words, what the saying goes is that if your neighbor loses a job, we're in a recession. But if you lose a job, you're in a depression. On the other side of it, there's guys like me, and hopefully a lot of your listeners, who are doing extremely well. In all my life, I've never made so much money between 2007 and 2010. I mean, it's been the best years of my life. I've made millions, and I got tax-free money, too.
And that's what I want to talk to you about. It is the best of times if you have the financial education. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I started the Rich Dad Company years ago simply because I could see this crisis coming. My latest book was called Rich Dad's Prophecy, and it's about Rich Conspiracies of the Rich.
Right.
And it's how the rich have rigged the game. So once I knew how the game was rigged, which I became aware of with my Rich Dad, and then in 1972 I was a pilot in Vietnam, and I saw the Vietnamese people starting to run, and they didn't want dollars and they didn't want piastre, their fiat currency. They wanted gold. And I started in 1972 as a young guy going, why do they want gold? I didn't understand it. And then I realized that I was not fighting for liberty, I was fighting for oil. And I realized I was being lied to. So as a Marine pilot and an Academy graduate, I came back to the States, and the first course I did was a real estate course. Because my Rich Dad said to me, the dollar is now debt. After 71, when Nixon took us off the gold standard, the dollar became debt. And he says, if you're going to be rich, you're going to have to learn how to manage debt. And so today, I'm hundreds of millions of dollars in debt, but good debt that makes me rich. Unfortunately, most people have bad debt, and that's why in 1997 I said in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, your house is not an asset. And of course, every realtor stopped sending me Christmas cards.
Not every realtor. I'm a realtor, and I totally understood what you were saying.
Yeah, people got set up. And in Conspiracy of the Rich, I explain why there's no financial education in schools. It's not an accident.
I want to talk more about real estate here in just a few minutes, but first, I had heard you also say that the United States is going to come to a point here pretty soon where there will be no middle class, only rich or poor. Are you saying that because of your expectation of hyperinflation?
No, not. Well, hyperinflation is a symptom, if you know what I mean. It's like having a fever.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that our economy is cancer, and the middle class is probably being eaten alive by the cancer. If the middle class went to school, they got a job, they work hard, they save money, they try and get out of debt, then they buy a house, and they put their money in mutual funds. That's the cancer. It's the cancer of the brain. They really do not know what they're doing with their money. And it's because they're not working for money anymore. They're working for debt. After 1971, the dollar is debt. You have to learn how to use debt.
Yeah, and what's really scary is the number of people who seem, they sense that something's going wrong, with the economy, and yet they're doing exactly the opposite of what they should be doing, which is hoarding cash. One lady I know, she's got tens of thousands stashed in a wall safe, behind a picture frame. There's just nothing worse you can do, right?
I agree, and I have relatives who are hoarding cash, and the reason they hoard cash is because they're not financially educated. And it's really tragic, and so since they're not educated, they do exactly what they were trained, like Pavlov trained his dogs, to save money and turn your money over to Wall Street the banks where you save your money and Wall Street are the very guys who caused the crash. It's tragic but funny at the same time. So they just keep doing the same old thing, giving the money to the very people that screwed them.
It's amazing. It is. It really is. And speaking of that, let's talk about 401ks and IRAs for a second. There's been plenty of warning signs, that we may possibly see some kind of government takeover with these accounts. They're going to force people to invest in treasuries or whatever else. Could you talk a little bit about the very powerful psychosis, is what I call it, that comes with shutting that thing down and just taking the tax hit and moving on? I mean, if you had an IRA, Robert, let's say you had, $2 million sitting in the thing, knowing what you know, wouldn't you take the thing, cash it out right now, and just take the tax hit?
Well, I have a Roth IRA, and it's full of gold and silver. So I just don't trade, stocks and bonds. And all stocks and all bonds and the dollar are derivatives. They're derivatives of tangible assets. So the average person doesn't know that. You have to go back again in Conspiracy of the Rich. I go, why did they change the rule in 1974? Which created ERISA, Employment Retirement Income Securities Act, which now is known as a 401k, ARA, or SEP. The reason they did that was because my father's generation, the World War II generation, remembered the stock market crash, and they stayed out of the stock market. So Wall Street then went to the government, i.e. Nixon and Gerald Ford, and said, we need to do something about this. So they said, let's force every worker into the stock market through a 401k.
Let's suck the cash right in.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong, because where do I get most of my money to borrow? I get it from banks from savers, from their savings. I borrow their money at very low rates. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, I go to pension funds, and the pension fund just bought me a huge resort and 5 golf courses. So I use the commoners. I hate to use the word commoners, but they're buying common shares of stock. That's why they're commoners. They don't know what to do with their money, so they park their money in these 401ks. And a guy like me comes along and says, hey, can I use that money? The banks say, please do. Please use this money. We can't do anything with it.
You mentioned common stock. It amazes me, Robert, to see the Dow Jones at the level that it is right now. I mean, we got PE ratios out of whack, I think, still. Do you think... Sometimes I think they're kind of propping up the stock market to just kind of lure the sheep in before they whack them upside the head with some kind of sudden crash. What do you say?
Well, that's the game. It's no different than the people who got sucked into real estate around 2007. It's no different. They just suck them in. Gold's going to do the same thing, and silver's going to do the same thing. And once gold passes, let's say 2,000, and every sucker will then come into the market.
And of course,
it always happens. It always happens. You got to have sheep.
And when the crash comes, that's when guys like you run in and start buying with both hands. That's the game, right?
Yeah, but I've already more than that is I've already moved on off of gold and silver onto other things. So I was buying gold at $265 an ounce. Mm-hmm. And so that's much better to me. So I don't really care if it goes up and down. I've already moved on into small IPO stocks and companies I know and I control. So that's what I do. It's a different level with financial education. I don't recommend what I do, but I recommend people get financially educated so they can make better decisions.
Well, let's explore your position on the precious metals a little bit more here. You're saying, you've already taken your position with precious metals, and right now you're not buying anymore, but you're not selling right now either, correct?
I don't sell my real estate. I don't sell. I'm an investor. You see, a person who buys to sell is a trader. Like Jim Cramer is a trader. He buys to sell. And people who invest in a 401k for the long term are investors, but they're also suckers, because the mutual funds will rip out their earnings via expenses. So you've got to be smarter. That's all I mean. So I don't sell real estate. I don't do anything. I'm a pure cash flow guy. So my extra cash, since I don't like banks, I like banks to borrow money from, but I don't like banks to save money in. So I just hold my wealth in gold and silver. I've been doing this for years. So that's what I do.
And you mentioned gold 2000 is going to be a time when you start getting nervous and getting ready to pull out of that thing. What about silver?
Well, silver is different than gold. Silver is it's an industrial commodity, precious metal. So the first time in history, silver, there's more gold than silver on planet Earth. I'm in the mining business. I own a gold mine, I own a silver mine, and I own a copper mine. So I understand mining. So silver is very rare right now. So I always tell the little guys, I may just call them little guys, but if you haven't got a couple of million, you're little in the market. So you've really got to, at that point, say, well, what's my best ride? And I think the best ride and the safest ride for most people is silver, not gold.
Where do you think silver is ultimately headed, both in price and in terms of the gold-silver ratio?
Well, I think the gold-silver ratio has always been at 14. But like I said, that's so out of whack today. It's like the PE's out of whack. Just know that silver is being consumed. We have a water problem, and silver is used in water purification. Silver is used in every cell phone, every computer, every iPad. And the more we go into the information age versus the industrial age, metals, precious metals like silver become more rare than gold. So silver is being consumed while gold is being hoarded. So the rumor of all the gold bugs is that the central banks, like the Korean banks and all that, are now starting to buy gold. And that's just a rumor. But I just operate on capitalism. If we need silver, I want to own silver. I own many oil wells. I don't own oil stocks. Like I don't like BP or Exxon. I don't play that game. I just want the pure production. So I want the pure production of oil. Plus I get tax breaks. So silver and gold are things I just store my wealth in. And hopefully I'll never have to spend it, because I have excess money and I want to hold it in gold and silver. That's the difference.
Yeah, and so it retains its value instead of being wiped out by all this money printing. What about this thing they slipped into the healthcare bill, Robert, that requires a gold dealer to issue a 1099 on you if you sell back more than $600 worth of gold? Or there's also penalties for holding gold outside the U.S. What's the government up to here?
Well, it's called fascism. Fascism is when you're afraid of your own government. It's not. They've gone beyond socialism.
How much worse is it going to get?
Well, for the middle class, it's going to be terrible. I mean, what you said earlier was, the middle class is being wiped out. Middle class is going to get cleaned out by two things: taxes and inflation. They're being wiped out left, right, and center.
Yeah, simple as that. Well, I want to move on to real estate here for a few minutes, Robert. You and your partners, of course, own lots of apartment complexes. One thing I was curious about, with the housing crash going on, we're seeing lots of renters right now. I mean, here in Austin, we're seeing occupancy, at record